Well, greetings, Veritan friends. It's Maynard, Mike, and Brett here with something that is really unique and super exciting for us. We're going to get to visit today with Dr. Rafael Grossi. He's the Director General of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this is just a real exciting moment for us. Dr. Grossi, let me just pause and say we're so thrilled to have you. You get to see so much of what is truly happening globally with nuclear. You're joining us today from Vienna. And so, again, thank you. We just cannot wait to compare notes with you and ask you all our questions.
Well, my pleasure. Let's get on with it.
All right, let's do it. Mike, let me turn to you and see what kind of market update you've got for us today.
Yeah, Maynard. I'd say markets today are down a little bit. But the Nasdaq and S&P 500, continue to hit all-time highs. They're up about 1.5% since last week's COBT. I'd say what's hitting markets today. Markets are reacting to South Korean president declaring martial law in South Korea. Korean equity markets are down about 3%, and the currency is down about 2%. We'll see how things unfold there in the next 24 to 48 hours. Tomorrow, the French lawmakers led by Marine Le Pen are holding a no confidence vote to topple the new president, the new French prime minister. So that's really, really big news. Just to kind of give you an idea of how big that is. France is the second largest economy in the EU. So this is big news, and we'll see what plays out tomorrow on Wednesday. As far as U.S. markets, I think U.S. markets are trying to comprehend, what Trump's tariffs rhetoric means. They're trying to understand if that's really going to be reality or what. It seems like rhetoric at this point. The biggest issue that Trump said this week was, is that he vowed this week to impose 100% tariff on BRICS countries that moved away from the U.S. dollar. This is nutty talk, but it's stuff that he throws out there, and so the markets are trying to digest it, and so that's what's affecting markets here in the last couple of days, and what we expect is going to happen in the next couple of days. As far as crude oil thoughts. WTI is up about $2 today to $70 a barrel, and it's up because the U.S. sanctioned about 35 foreign entities for their ties to this crude oil shadow fleet. We've talked about this in the past, the shadow fleet being these Iranian tankers that are going to China, loaded crude oil, and are getting past all these sanctions. And so they're levying, they're trying to basically clamp down on that, and that's what's got crude oil price up today. Now, what's going to happen is on Thursday, we've talked about this before, OPEC has delayed their December 1st meeting till Thursday. And so I think most people think a consensus is that they're going to basically delay production cuts by another 3 months to get through the seasonally, weak Q1 report, period. What I'd say about that is this is total consensus now. If it's more than 3 months, and I think markets, crude oil will probably go up. If it's at 3 months, it's probably going to go sideways to down because it's consensus. Now, as far as natural gas, we talked about this last week. Gas spiked last week, and now it's plunging this week. And it's plunged from roughly $3.35 an M to around $3 an M today. And that's because the U.S. weather forecast over the next 6 to 10 days has turned a little bit warmer. And also lower 48 gas production is actually rebounded up to around 104 BCF a day. Interesting thing we talked about last week was that EU gas is rallying, and it's still staying pretty firmly supported here. And the reason why that is because you've had one of the biggest natural gas withdrawals for the month of November in EU ever. And so, their storage levels are below average, slightly below average, not significantly, but slightly below average. What's interesting is the EU this week said that they want, storage targets to be at 50% in February versus previous targets of 45% in February. And the reason they put this out there is they're getting concerned with growing supply concerns in 2025. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. As far as energy equity thoughts, the energy sector is down about 1.5–2% over the last week. It's because of the strong U.S. dollar, something we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. They're also talking about concern with this OPEC meeting. We'll see how that turns out this week. And importantly, what these 25% tariffs on oil from Canada and Mexico, what that means for U.S. energy policy. That's been out there, and so that's a concern. Now, to kind of round it out, we have a guest today. It's going to be a nuclear expert. So we thought we'd basically give you an idea of what nuclear equities have done this year. And we've talked about this quite a bit. Nuclear levered IPPs, we're talking about the Constellations, NRG, Vistras of the world. As a group, they're up about 165 to 170%. But what's more interesting is like over the last 3 to 6 months, some of these SMRs, that's small modular reactors, are up anywhere from 300 to 400%. So those stocks have really taken a lead here. And so, like I said, we're looking forward to hearing our guests today talking about some issues. And with that, Maynard, we'll send it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Well, Dr. Grossi, let's just go ahead and jump in. And I know my colleagues, Brett and Mike, will obviously jump in with questions too. You know, as I was looking at the menu and we were talking about it internally, you see so many things around nuclear safety, nuclear development, nuclear proliferation. There's just so many aspects to what you do. Let me just jump in because I think what's happening in Ukraine is really top of mind for all of us right now. I don't mean to prejudge it, but knowing that we've now had a change in administration, the Trump team is coming, that seems to be creating this window of instability where things may get worse before they get better. We don't know, but you've been on the ground in Ukraine multiple times. Obviously, everybody's been very focused on the Zaporizhia power plant and what could happen there and making sure that it doesn't get struck. You've also been in Russia, thinking about making sure a nuclear plant is not struck there. But that situation, you're close to President Zelensky. What could you tell us about what's happening there and your latest impressions of it?
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, is in the agenda of things happening around the world. Of course, the war in Ukraine features the top, and within this conflict, we have this very particular, unprecedented issue around the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. 6 gigawatts of installed capacity there, 6 reactors there, which were seized right at the beginning of the conflict. When that happened, which, as I said, had never taken place before in a conflict, we at the agency decided that this could, of course, have enormous, huge reverberations, not only on the war, but in general, in terms of the energy markets and the nuclear activities in general. And as you know, you were saying I'm the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is an international organization, 180 members. Some people know us as the UN Atomic chapter. We are independent, but more or less we can describe it like that. So among our many missions and responsibilities, it is, of course, to ensure that nuclear safety is ensured. So we jumped on it. I'm oversimplifying what was a very complicated process that finally led us to be able to set up a permanent presence at the plant. So we have there a group of IAEA safety, safeguard, security experts who are living there and are doing a number of things. Of course, providing information, objective information, as opposed to what would otherwise be a sided or biased narrative coming from either the Ukrainians or the Russians, depending. So we have a source of objective, impartial information. We are also interacting with the Russian management at the plant, trying to make sure that nothing serious happens there. And at the political level, I have been engaged in constant, permanent contact with both presidents. President Zelensky, as you said, I have a very close relationship with him. I've been in Ukraine 10 times, 5 times, and in Zaporizhia. Every time I see and I discuss with President Zelensky, but also with President Putin, which is indispensable. Some people have criticized us for doing that. I think essential ABC of diplomacy and negotiation is that you talk with all sides, especially during a war. And we have been able to do this which is very important given the dangers that have existed. Since the very beginning of the war, there were attacks on the plant, there were attempts to leave it in a blackout situation, things that could have led to meltdowns, to nuclear accidents with serious radiological consequences, which we, knock on wood, have been able to prevent so far. This is, among other things, because we were able to establish that presence. I was talking to the leaders. I went to the United Nations Security Council. I established a number of principles and to describe it in some way, behavioral guidelines that should be observed by everybody when it comes to how we deal with Zaporizhia. Boils down to don't shoot at a nuclear power plant. It can be elaborated in a more sophisticated way, but this is the essence of what we have been doing so far. If you ask me what is the situation today, it is always very, very fragile, precarious. I have described it as being. Sometimes when we have 10 days of a relative calm, people say, well, it's getting better, and then you have a drone, you have an explosion, you have a power line that is down, and all of a sudden the nuclear power plant is being cooled by emergency diesel generators, which is the last line of defense that a facility like that could have. So I would say until the war ends or gets into, which is more probable in my opinion, and enters into a different phase, we will see. You were mentioning new government in your country, and certainly the possibility of new dynamics there. We will see what happens. But in any case, until we get to that moment where this zone ceases to be an active combat zone as it is now, we will not be able to say that the situation is stable. I hope this is clear.
No, that's very clear. So do you think, Dr. Grossi, that the overall situation, as it relates to the plant, but also just more broadly, it has felt less stable there. The Ukrainians are now using U.S. weaponry to fire farther into Russia. Putin has made some pretty aggressive comments about his determination to ratchet up as necessary. Like, is the situation, whether it's the plant or just more broadly, do you share this concern that between now and January 20th, when we get a handover in the U.S. president, that there's just this period of greater concern?
Frankly, I don't see this period as more dangerous than some other periods that we lived before.
Okay.
Perhaps these periods were not hitting the headlines, but we had situations where the plant was being shelled, or in the summer of this year, in August, when you may remember, maybe you saw the pictures of one of the cooling towers of Zaporizhia up in flames. So we've known moments of enormous anxiety at the plant, and I think you mentioned also in your introduction the episode on August 11, when an incursion of Ukrainian troops into Russian territory and straight into the direction of the Kursk nuclear power plant added to the anxiety and the sense of uncertainty that we were having. Since then, the situation, I think, did not get worse, and I wouldn't say improve, but because there are still combats there. But we were able to stabilize it in terms of taking Kursk, at least in principle, out of the equation, the confrontation, the direct confrontation there. So my impression is that the situation, as far as the conflict in general is concerned, continues to be of active warfare. We don't see an immediate improvement in it. I should also say that we have, apart from what I described to you in Zaporizhia, we have also deployments in all other nuclear facilities, in Rivne, Melnitsky, South Ukraine, and of course, Chernobyl. And we have started missions to monitor the situation of the energy electrical substations in country, which now in winter are being especially targeted, causing enormous damage not only to the substations but in general to the supply of power to the entire country, and in as much as the nuclear side is concerned, to the facilities that depend on it for the cooling functions of the reactors, as you know very well. So the whole thing is extremely fragile, and through our presence and our interactions with both governments, we are trying to avoid the worst.
How, Dr. Grossi, how many people, if you don't mind me asking, how many people do you have in country doing all this?
Well, you know, it's a big group, relatively speaking, of course, because we have 4 or 5 per station, and then we have, you know, security people. So it's a relatively sizable operation. And then, of course, we rotate these people because they cannot stay for, you know, for security reasons. I cannot get into too much detail, but you know, they don't stay there forever. We have to rotate them, and the rotations themselves are dangerous. When we go to Zaporizhia, we have to cross the front line, and they do it once a month. I've done it 5 times, meaning 10 times on one way and the other, and on occasion we've been under fire. So it is not a movie; it's a real war.
I mean, listening to it on behalf of the rest of us, you know, thank you for your leadership and for putting all these people, and thank you to them for this very dangerous work they're doing. It's my impression, you tell us if we're wrong, you did not have to be as proactive about this with people in country as you are being.
Nobody asked us to do that, and perhaps no one expected us to do this. The normal thing would have been to run a seminar after the war on lessons learned. So we decided to, you know, take the plunge and go straight there and start working there. And I thank you for recognizing our staff, because they are, you know, to go to these places, you have to volunteer, of course, to go there.
Your team, where are they drawn from? Like what parts of the world?
The staff of the IAEA is mainly technical people coming from the nuclear sectors of all our membership. So we are the overhead people like me. I'm elected. I am an elected director general, or people that are not you know, nuclear engineers or nuclear safety experts or chemists, engineers is a tiny minority. So our staff, we are roughly 3,000 people with 180 member states, are drawn from, you know, the nuclear sectors. They are coming from nuclear power plants. They are coming from national regulators. They are coming from companies. It is a very fine group of women and men of the highest quality. And as I was saying, they are basically international civil servants. And they didn't sign up to go for war when they were expecting to have a job here in beautiful Vienna. But what is really admirable, I would say, is that when I have to draw up the list of the teams that have to go to Zaporizhia, I never, and it's been more than 2 years now, I never had a problem in having them, and I have many people that the only thing they want is to return. They know they are writing history. They know that they are part of one of the most dramatic chapters of nuclear history, I would say, and they all want to help and to participate. I think this is the idea. If you allow me a more perhaps elevated kind of comment, but which I think has to do with what we are discussing at this moment, Maynard. When I say that, I suppose this is the idea of why you may have international organizations and why they can perform on occasion certain functions and activities that no one else could be doing. But of course, you have to decide to do it and to take the step and to do it, of course, wisely. Otherwise, you are not going to be allowed to do it. I don't have an army with me. I have persuasion, diplomacy, and a technical mission to accomplish. And this is what we are trying to do.
This, to your point there on why you have international organizations, and I've seen you say this in some of your previous public discussions. We live in a time where people have a little less faith in international organizations.
Yes.
I won't name them all, but we've just kind of lived through, that's been the trend.
Indeed.
But you're bucking that trend.
Well, I would recognize, in my family, friends, colleagues, over beers and dinner, whatever, people will say, what this UN thing, and what is your added value, and et cetera, et cetera. And I can say that it's understandable on occasion that people may have doubts about the mission. But of course, I want to turn this into a discussion on multilateralism, but there is a lot of good that is done by many organizations. I suppose there is also a lot of things that are not working in the way they should. What we are trying to do from our perspective, what we are doing is putting our job at the service of the international community that is like the American taxpayer, who is paying for this, is having an international organization, which is an American idea. We come from President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech. And this is why we have this word agency, which is not common parlance in UNEs. We talk about organizations. This is a bit of an American thing that stayed with us. He spoke about an agency that would be doing a peaceful nuclear, of course. And this is how we declined this in 2024.
I was thinking about so the agency was started in roughly 1957.
Yeah.
And I think it was recognized pretty early on that you need to think about situations where a nuclear plant is in a combat zone. And so that the nations of the world broadly have agreed that it's a crime of war to hit a nuclear plant in a combat situation, a nuclear plant. Is the Ukraine war in the history of atomic energy? Is it the most? It's the most likely to involve this risk. Like, we haven't really seen a war of this scope and size that also had this many nuclear plants.
Exactly.
Is that
exactly
correct?
It is correct to say that, of course, this is unprecedented. Never before had we a vast conventional type of conflict, more akin to what we saw in the Second World War than wars of the 21st century as we would have imagined them. We have artillery, we have infantry, we have shelling, we have heavy weaponry, we have trenches, we have territorial occupation and lines that move, even more like in the First World War, where you had these fronts between Germany and France that were moving or not moving. And this happened in a country that used to have 15 nuclear reactors over 4 huge sites. Ukraine used to be and continues to be a very nuclear country. It used to have 50% of its energy from nuclear origin, nuclear source. Now minus the 20-something% that Zaporizhia represented. I would say the remaining 9 nuclear power plants are the lifeline of this country. Don't forget that because of the war, Ukraine has lost half of its installed power producing capacity. Can you imagine this happening in the United States or in any other country? It would be complete blackout, the economy completely paralyzed, and so on. So this is what we are living there, and what is happening here. The issue is the war. It's not the nuclear technology as such. It's what we are seeing as a countrywide war ongoing.
You took over as the Director General in 2019.
Yeah.
You just elected to another 4-year term.
Yeah. From
2019 to today, it's been a stunning change in so many things.
Yeah.
One is just the broad-based re-embrace of nuclear.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's been a heightened tension around climate, followed by what you might say is also a heightened realization of the difficulties of accomplishing many of those goals. And of course, there's been the Ukraine war. Did you ever think when you were stepping in 2019 that you might preside over this incredible change around nuclear?
Certainly not the war, but I felt that the winds were changing when it comes to nuclear energy, and I felt that the IAEA should be, and this is what we started and doing, and I think we are doing right now, that the agency should be playing a very active role in this regard, because if this new moment, let's put it like this, for nuclear energy worldwide is to succeed, we need an agency that is providing good safety, security, non-proliferation, and also promotional services, because there are many countries, developing countries, that come to us for capacity building, institution building, to have their regulators in place, or to have their supply chain in place, or to help them evaluate bids from vendors that approach them. So again, I was always thinking that this would happen. What I changed is an attitude of an agency that is proactive, that has embraced industry, that is happy to work with the private sector, of course, being very cognizant of our distinctive roles, but knowing that, my statute, which is what I swore on, says that we need to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So you can embrace that mandate in different ways. It's like a conductor. You play your piece with brio or less. I'm an Argentine of Italian origin, so I think I fall in the category of those who play with a lot of brio. And this is why I felt that this was the moment where the agency should be doing these things. Hence, the initiatives, I don't want to get bureaucratic here and bore people, but we have taken initiatives in terms of regulatory harmonization, industrial standardization. Many things where the IAEA, as a big hub, universal, global, let's say, global hub for nuclear, can play again a unique role. Because let's not forget that of course, in America, you have a market that is there, is huge, but nuclear is very international in general. You see a lot of trade, a lot of cooperation, many projects that bring companies from all over the world, and the agency has a role to play in that regard. So yeah, I did not imagine many things, but I wanted to see certain things happening. And certainly, we are trying to put oil in the wheels so that things work in the right direction. And then things, of course, things happen. Think about a presidential term. For me, is similar. You will have some things that are unpleasant coming your way, and you have to be prepared.
Dr. Grossi, thank you again for joining us today.
Please.
I just want to say again and reiterate what Maynard said about how appreciative we are and everybody should be of the activities that your agency is taking on in Ukraine right now. But following up on a little bit of what you said around the promotional activities and engaging with newcomer nations as well as nations that might be thinking about nuclear anew for the first time in a generation or so.
Indeed.
In the United States right now, around conversations like that, sometimes we feel a bit of a tension between maybe the small advanced nuclear concepts and the large existing nuclear designs. We have dialogues that say, why are we building these? Why not those? Build what we know, things like that. And a lot of times folks will just say, build all of it, right? Which sometimes kind of sidesteps the issue. So I'm just curious, in your role, do you feel a similar tension amongst the international agencies? Do you see it, as an international agency amongst the countries and organizations that you work with?
But you're making me think. I think it's a very good point. I would say that in the international market, more than having a competition or a dispute over attention and collaboration, what I see is these different spheres like moving in parallel and not touching each other so much. In our overview of the market, what we still see is, of course, growth. Then, as you know, there is a discussion of how much. There are the countries that have been saying that they're going to triple, etc. There is the IAEA saying, well, how much, or the World Nuclear Association. What we are seeing is a doubling, perhaps a little bit more, of the current capacities between now and 2050, more or less. So from the 400 giga to perhaps 800, 900 for sure. And when we look at that, our economists are seeing perhaps in the best scenario 20% of SMR, more or less, not more. And in more modest projections, between 6, 8, 9. So what we are saying is that the pie is big. There is space for all, and what we see is that these different technologies are tending to different parts of the market, as you know. Now these days, not a conversation will take place without us referring to high-tech companies and AI companies, and there is roughly a day passes without a new contract being signed. Google, Meta, OpenAI, Microsoft, Amazon, all of them. So for the first time, interesting for analysts like you and others, for the first time, we see demand-driven nuclear. First time in history. So it's the market that is pushing, and that is because it has come to the rightful conclusion that it is the most efficient way to power these needs. And at the same time, you have fleet replacement in the United States, which is in and by itself a big chunk. You have fleet doubling in China. China is going to overtake France as number 2 in the world within a few years, getting to 70 more or less operating reactors. France is going to, etc. So I see this as a parallel movements, as opposed to movements canceling out. Sometimes, not for you, but for the normal people out there, there is this wrong impression that SMR is the good nuclear that is going to come to replace the bad old, elephantiasis reactors, and that is not the case. That is not the case.
Dr. Grossi, it's been 13 years since the Fukushima accident in Japan, so I'd love to hear from you the role IAEA played before the accident, during the accident, especially the nuclear shutdown and cleanup, and your role in the years since the accident, especially getting a handful of nuclear facilities back online, and maybe where you see nuclear sentiment today in Japan and elsewhere.
Yeah, another big topic. In terms of what happened at the accident, we would need several podcasts like this to analyze that. But what one could say in general, and it's not only me saying, but the different analysis that have been made, had the IAEA nuclear safety standards been followed to the letter, we would have never had what happened. It happened, and from day one, the agency has been working there. It's painstaking work, trying to get the debris of the stricken reactors. But one interesting point, and the one where we have been very busy lately, is on the issue that has a geopolitical dimension. Is on the issue of the controlled discharge of the water, the tons of water that were accumulating around the reactors, and on which Japan was not moving. Finally, with Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, there was a decision to treat it in a certain way and to start a controlled discharge. And this, of course, caused a roar in the region, in China, in the Pacific Islands, in the Republic of Korea, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, etc. And here is, again, I think, a good example of the role of that an international organization, or the IAEA in this case, can play in order to, first of all, put objective information and to bring sides together. What I did at the time, I went to Japan, I discussed with late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, and later on with his successor, Kishida. And I said, okay, guys, you want to do this? I would suggest that you do it with us. Not because you need it, but because the operation that you are going to start is one that is causing enormous concern. And no matter if you say that this is done in many other parts of the world and it's part of a normal standing operating procedure in any operating nuclear power plant, and perhaps there is more tritium in other places than what you could ever generate after or have as a remnant after having treated this, but you need the IAEA there to be there, present, as I said, that at that time, before, during, and after, checking the whole procedure, monitoring independently, informing, and real time what is happening. And I think this has been perhaps not very interesting for the general audiences, and they are right, but for those who are in this industry, it has been a great success, because we were able to dismantle what could have been a very tense. This had huge economic consequences. China imposed a ban on seafood and fish from Japan, causing enormous damage to the trade balance between the countries and the Japanese economy. So apart from the tensions which in that part of the world are very present for other reasons that we are not here to discuss, but which are evident. So we were able to do this. We have been doing this, and we continue. So it is an issue of managing on the one hand the stricken reactors. Then the process are moving relatively well on the reactors themselves. We are present there, checking the procedures, the robotics that are being used to do the cleanup, basically, and then making sure that there is no environmental residual damage after it. So basically, this is what we are doing there.
Dr. Grossi, I was just thinking, one of the things that's really interesting that you've been championing that is just not as much a part of the discussion is how nuclear can help the developing world.
Yeah,
it's often thought of as France or the U.S. or places like that, and hopefully all of us are going to use a lot more nuclear. But bringing nuclear to the developing world is extremely interesting. Can you just talk about that effort and also talk about it in light of, I think people have this impression that, for instance, organizations like the NRC, they have the highest standards and other places may have lower standards, and that could be an issue, and we need to be worried about that. Would you just talk about?
Excellent point, Maynard,
Thank
because we want to promote the nuclear energy, but of course we have to make sure that this happens in the best possible conditions. And in this regard, the work of the national regulators is paramount. We have, for what we call newcomer countries, we have Nuclear for Dummies, or the User's Manual for Nuclear Energy, which is a program that is called the Milestones Program. And I will mention an example of a country that followed the Milestones Program, and you will see what that gives you. The United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
They followed the IAEA Milestones Program, which has 19 steps, from the decision to go for nuclear energy production to the back end of the cycle. And this is very important because by having this type of approaches, we give countries the capacity, the institutional density that they need to have, and we check it, which is most important. We, through a system of peer reviews that we have, of course, I don't run a nuclear police in the world, although my safeguards inspectors are quite close to that, but that is another issue, is the non-proliferation part, where we do have the capacity to refer countries to the Security Council, so we have some teeth, unlike most international organizations. But when it comes to nuclear, what we have is a system of incentives, peer reviewing, which is constant. So the whole industry is mobilized. We call them here in Vienna. We analyze, following the Convention of Nuclear Safety and other instruments that we have, that countries do things right. And as the example of the UAE shows, it works. Now Turkey is doing the same. Bangladesh is doing this. And I mentioned these countries because these countries are in a very advanced degree of construction and very soon commissioning their new nuclear power plants. So it is almost impossible for a country, since this could be a legitimate societal concern, to just decide to have a nuclear power plant and go and build it without any monitoring or any international control. It's impossible.
Well, I know we're going to lose you, and we're just so appreciate your time and all your work that you're doing. Maybe the last one, and we're, as you know, pro-energy people, but we're also very market-oriented.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we find interesting, government support should go to nuclear. Governments can help nuclear. Governments are a very logical participant in assisting the development of more nuclear. But how do you think about markets and private capital and more funding from that community for nuclear? We're starting to see it here. There are public nuclear companies in the U.S. That are getting started with new technologies. But are you spending any time around private capital?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes, I do it all the time. I meet with nuclear CEOs from all over the world. As I was saying, I think that they have to feel that the IAEA is there to help them and also to establish a mutually beneficial relationship, because we know where they want to go. We can, on occasion, remind them of certain things, alert them on some others, and we are talking to both sides. We are talking to vendors, we are talking to clients at the same time. And I think that in terms of financing on nuclear, we see a steady curve. as I was saying, upward curve, as I was saying, perhaps not at the pace and velocity that would be required, but certainly a very positive one, which at this point, I think it's unstoppable. I am also trying to work with international financing institutions which have been hostile to nuclear. And this is very bad in terms of market widening. Luckily, I think, for example, I had the opportunity through the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, who is an entrepreneur, as you know, and has a very open, dynamic mind. And for the first time in history, the Director General of the IAEA could go to the board of the World Bank to talk about these things and the necessity for development banks. The World Bank is the first, and then the others follow. This is why it was so important to come to Washington. And I've been talking to other development banks, but for a small country or a medium-sized country, having a bit of support in terms of some of the projects is going also to be attracting more private capital and creating an environment which is more amenable and favorable for nuclear. But the prospects are very positive. Certainly the best as we've seen in many decades. So we have to seize the opportunity.
Dr. Grossi, I think over time we've recognized those organizations that you were just referencing. If they will improve or advance their energy thinking, that could do so much for the world. So bless you for trying to get some opinions changed in those places.
I am positive. I am optimistic. This will happen. I think it may take a little bit of time, but I think the facts, the objective facts are there, and I think this is the right time. And I thank you for having had this opportunity to address your audience, your public, that I know is a very qualified one. And hope to see them here in Vienna. Come visit us anytime.
We will definitely come to Vienna, and we'd love to have you here. You know, Houston's known as the capital of the traditional energy space, but we like to think we're broader than that, and having you anytime would be a real honor. So thank you.
We will do it for sure. I thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Grossi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.